I lost a leg in a car accident trying to save my fiancé, Carter. But at a party, he took my prosthetic away just to make his sister, Peter, laugh. She clutched her chest, looking weak. Carter, Ella's leg scared me. Carter frowned when he heard that, threw the prosthetic to me. Go home. Your sister can't handle being scared. When I left without saying a word, he panicked, searching everywhere for me. He said, I can change. Don't leave me. I sat in the dressing room and sighed softly. Earlier, someone tripped and spilled a drink all over me. Because my prosthetic wouldn't bend easily, I had to take it off and set it aside while I changed. When I came back, the prosthetic was gone. My mind went blank. It was missing. Panicked, I tried to find it. But just as I stumbled out, someone tripped me, and I fell embarrassingly to the floor. Everyone stared at me like sharp knives stabbing my back. I tried getting up and saw Carter sitting with Peter. I knew what he held in his hand too well. My prosthetic. Embarrassed, I asked, give it back, please. Peter saw me and walked over slowly, with Carter supporting her like she might fall. She gently clutched her chest, pretending to be apologetic. Sorry, Ella. I felt faint, so Carter brought your prosthetic to cheer me up. Her gaze dropped to my stump, and she quickly looked away, acting startled. Ella, your leg's terrifying me. Upon hearing that, Carter immediately supported her, patting her back, then tossed my prosthetic at my feet. Go home. Your sister can't handle being scared. I looked at Carter's indifferent face, feeling my heart shatter. Everyone's disdainful looks forced me to bow my head and take a heavy breath. I struggled up, picked up my prosthetic, and returned to the dressing room. I stayed there a long time, and it wasn't just from physical pain. I knew Carter worried about Peter. So, whenever he left on important days or stood by her at parties, I accepted it. He always felt he owed Peter, and said I did too. I sat in the dressing room until the party ended. When leaving, I realized I left my bag in the lounge. As I neared the lounge, I overheard a voice. Carter, are you still planning on getting engaged? I held my breath, anxious for Carter's reply. After a pause, Carter finally said, Peter's not doing well. The engagement is on hold again. I wasn't surprised by his answer and laughed to myself. The engagement was delayed for 2 years, always for the same reason. But then, his friend said, you've liked Peter since school. Why are you with Ella now? Hearing those words, I turned pale, clenching my palms tightly. Carter took a drag on his cigarette. Peter insisted on going abroad. I was upset, so. After high school, Peter left for art school abroad. Carter didn't see her off, and I assumed they were upset with each other. Turned out, he asked me out just to spite Peter. I stood outside, feeling ice cold, my mind in chaos. What did that make me? What did our years together mean? Peter and I are twins. She's lively, while I'm reserved. Our families have been close since childhood, so Carter and I were always together. It's hard not to notice a guy when you're young and he's around. I was too shy to express my feelings. After high school, Carter confessed to me. We were together for 4 years and planned to marry after graduation. Just before our engagement, Peter returned home. Carter and I were shopping for a wedding dress, and Peter wanted to come. I agreed, not foreseeing how it would change my life. Carter was driving, with Peter and me in the back. A truck hit us from the side, and no one could react in time. There were crashes, screams, and searing pain. When I woke up, my right leg was amputated. Seeing my missing leg, the world spun, and everything looked bleak. When my parents and Carter rushed in, they didn't comfort me. Instead, they shouted, "Do you know what danger you put your sister in?" Shocked, I stared at my dad's angry face, thinking I was dreaming. But their accusations felt too real, not a nightmare. They said Peter's internal injuries were severe, barely saved. Her recovery would be tough. They accused me of using her as a shield, which was why I only lost a leg. I was appalled, struggling to face her. She looked at me with tears, all innocent like, "Ella, I understand survival instincts. I don't blame you." My parents comforted her, telling her not to cry. Like clinging to a lifeline, I looked to Carter. Disappointment filled his eyes as he stood silently with Peter. When he said, "I was the driver, it's partly my fault," I understood. My family and loved one chose Peter's side. With a few words, I was guilty, branded selfish and unkind. I was at the same hospital with Peter, but they never came to see me. During all those treatments, I cried as I called Carter. He came once, sighed when he saw my tears. He wiped them away with his fingers, but his words were cold. "She's not doing well." We three grew up together, not to mention, he scanned me up and down with a look full of blame. I shut my eyes in despair, finishing the unspoken words for him. It was my fault she ended up like that. For the next 2 years, Peter would remind the family of my debt to her. Whenever I met with Carter, she'd complain about chest pains. Carter would drop everything to be by her side. I had no reason to make him stay, being the so-called culprit. All the while, I struggled with my damaged leg, trapped in agony. I didn't want to continue living like that. I needed to find Carter and break up with him face to face. So, I went back to the old house. After my leg was broken, my parents had me move out. The reason? Peter was uncomfortable seeing me. Carter, however, often went over to take care of her. Back at the old house, as I walked in, my parents barely glanced at me. "What are you doing here?" they asked plainly. I pressed my lips together, feeling like an outsider. "I'm looking for Carter." They ignored me, so I went upstairs alone. Standing outside Peter's room, I was met with a piercing sight. Carter was modeling for Peter, gazing at her lovingly as she painted. I awkwardly knocked on the door. "Carter, can you come out for a second?" They both glanced up, frowning. Carter stepped out, annoyance all over his face. "What is it?" I opened my mouth to speak when a sudden cry came from the room, Peter's voice. Carter's expression changed, and he rushed back in, not seeing me in the doorway. He accidentally knocked me down the stairs. The pain in my leg was excruciating, making me curl up. All I heard was Carter urgently calling Peter's name. My parents rushed past, not pausing as they went to her aid. Before long, Carter carried his sister downstairs, our parents following with worried expressions. I couldn't stand up from the pain, so I grabbed Carter's pant leg as they passed. He halted, looking down at me. "Are you going to keep pulling stunts like falling just because your sister isn't well?" Next second, they all hurried out, leaving me alone on the cold floor in excruciating pain. Tears fell as both my body and heart ached. After a while, I shakily tried to put my prosthetic leg back on. It seemed damaged from the fall, barely staying on. The pain was intense with each step. I got myself to the hospital alone. Through gritted teeth and a cold sweat, I thought, "This is it." All these years of affection were one-sided. I pulled out my phone and sent Carter a message. "Let's break up. We can cancel the engagement. This was a mistake from the start, so let's end it now." At the hospital, the doctor looked at the torn flesh and frowned. "How did this happen?" I looked down, avoiding his eyes. He was Barry, my former doctor. I used to accidentally cause him trouble during my treatments. I didn't expect to meet him again like this. Seeing my silence, he sighed and began the examination. Afterward, sitting in a wheelchair, I heard him say, "Avoid walking around for a while. Rest and heal well." I nodded, thanking him as I attempted to wheel myself away. Barry, however, took off his white coat and naturally grabbed the back of my wheelchair. Confused, I glanced back. He just gave me a quick look. "I'm off work, I'll give you a ride." I waved my hand. "No need, I can take a cab. I don't want to trouble you." But he acted like he didn't hear and pushed me out of the hospital. Unable to refuse, I accepted his kindness. Approaching his car, I awkwardly reached to open the passenger door. Barry beat me to it, lifting me effortlessly. My mind went blank, filled only with the faint scent of disinfectant from him. It seemed to be just a doctor's care, gently placing me in the seat. He folded up the wheelchair and put it in the trunk, all considerate and proper. On the way home, we stayed silent. I stared out the window, recalling past treatments. When I first got the prosthetic, I was covered in bruises. I tried calling Carter those nights while hiding in the hallway, but he hung up every time. Overwhelmed, I cried softly. Then the door opened. By the dim light, I saw that always cold face. Barry approached me, offering a tissue. I wiped my tears and apologized between sobs, "Sorry, doctor." He sighed, sitting beside me, speaking softly, "Why apologize? You're doing just fine." He paused, voice low and magnetic as he continued, "You cannot swim toward new horizons until you have the courage to lose sight of the shore." It made my heart shiver. That was a line from my favorite book. After losing my right leg, I often lay in the hospital, using books to escape the agony. I read that book the most. Covering my face, tears slipped through my fingers. It was the first time since the accident I felt a glimmer of rescue. After Barry dropped me home, I stayed inside for days. Carter called, his first words, "What are you up to?" He sighed. "Did you go to the hospital after you fell that day?" I replied casually. "It's the next day now. Isn't it a bit late to ask?" He was quiet for a couple of seconds, then softened his tone a bit. "Please, be good. You know Peter isn't in good health, and besides, she's like this because..." I cut him off, asking word by word. "I told you it wasn't me. Do you believe me?" "Ella." Carter called my name a bit sternly. "When you do something wrong, own up to it. Being selfish in a dangerous situation is one thing, but not admitting your mistakes. You weren't like this before." I looked down, full of self-mockery. "Does it matter how I used to be? You never liked me anyway. If Peter wasn't going abroad, you wouldn't have confessed to me, would you?" It was like he got choked all of a sudden, completely silent. After a while, he finally spoke up. "What nonsense are you thinking? I'm not imagining things. I heard it myself. So let's break up. You can tell my parents to call off the engagement. They won't want to see me." After saying that, I didn't want to talk to him anymore. I hung up and blocked his number. That night, I dreamed of Carter when we were younger. Back then, I was timid and shy, nowhere near as outgoing as Peter. Peter could paint and had learned to dance. She was always the center of attention. I, on the other hand, would just stay in the corner, quietly reading my book, turning page after page. I remember during my 18th birthday party, there were many guests. Peter performed ballet on stage, looking like a fairy, dazzling and mesmerizing. I had no talents to showcase and could only stand below the stage, like dust admiring a rose. Everyone's eyes were on Peter, even my parents were filled with love for their favored older daughter. It would be a lie to say I wasn't disappointed. But after so many years, I was used to it. I was planning to leave the event early when Carter suddenly approached. He stood in front of me holding a set of my favorite books. At that moment, the world went silent. All I saw were what seemed like stars shining in his eyes. He handed me the books, speaking earnestly. "Ella, happy 18th birthday." That was the first happy birthday just for me that I heard that night. When I woke from the dream, I sat on my bed, dazed, with the scenes from it in my head. At that time, Peter had already decided to go abroad. Was that why he only gave me a gift? Was this part of his tiff with Peter too? I couldn't help but speculate about him. Thinking back now, I thought I was at least the lead in someone's eyes. But the truth was, I was always the unnoticed ugly duckling in the corner. Carter never brought up calling off the engagement with his family, so I had to ring my parents. They just casually agreed, as if they'd long known something was up between Carter and Peter, waiting for me to bow out gracefully. Since figuring things out, I've been enjoying my own company, writing in my rented place. After the car accident, I didn't feel like going out to see people, so I became a full-time writer. I've even published a few novels, which have been received pretty well. This day, I was planning to go to the hospital to get my prosthetic back. A call unexpectedly came in. It was Barry. "You're going to the hospital today. I'm heading that way too, come down." I was surprised by his helpfulness and quickly wheeled myself downstairs. As I came down the accessible ramp, I saw Barry standing beside his car. Without his white coat, wearing a black trench coat, his good physique was even more obvious. I wheeled over to him and smiled. "Barry, aren't you working today? Why are you going to the hospital?" He walked behind me, pushing my wheelchair. "Just going back to pick up a few things." Then quite naturally, he leaned down, lifted me, and placed me in the passenger seat. It was different from the smell of disinfectant that day. Today, there was a faint woody scent on him. Sitting in the car, I suddenly thought of a new story I was writing. The main character is a doctor. With such a good source of information here, how could I waste it? I couldn't help but ask. "Barry, I'm writing a new novel with some medical-related questions. Can I ask you about them?" He turned the steering wheel, glanced at me lightly, and nodded. Though I'm quite reserved, I can be chatty when creating. The entire ride, I asked about all kinds of medical knowledge, jotting down notes along the way. He wasn't impatient at all, but patiently explained things to me. Before I knew it, we arrived at the hospital. Once I got my prosthetic, I couldn't wait to put it on. This one was much more comfortable than the previous ones, finally giving me some sense of security. As soon as I had it on, I tried to stand up and take a few steps. But since I hadn't used it for a while, and it was new, I didn't quite have my balance and wobbled backward. The next second, someone caught me by the waist and pulled me into a hug. Barry looked down at me, his eyes deep. My heart pounded rapidly, unsure if it was from being startled or something else. Instinctively, I wanted to move back but was held even tighter. His warm breath on my ear made me shiver a bit. "Take it slow, don't rush, remember how you did it before?" His low voice was by my ear, causing me to blush as I nodded. "Why yeah, I remember." I tried to focus, and soon, I walked more smoothly. Once he saw I was getting used to the new prosthetic, he let go of my hand. He stepped back a couple of steps, returning to a safe distance. All the way until he dropped me at home, I felt like I was still steaming. After thanking him, I was about to get out of the car. Barry suddenly stopped me. "Working on a new book? If you have questions, feel free to ask." My eyes lit up, and I nodded at him. "Thanks, Barry." He gave me a deep look, his eyes hiding emotions I couldn't understand. "No need to call a doctor, just call my name." I didn't really get it, but I nodded anyway. The weekend came, and I had a party to attend. I'm their daughter, after all, so I had to go back. At these kinds of events, I'm usually just some irrelevant extra, or even the butt of jokes. But there was Peter, in a high-fashion dress, looking like a goddess. Carter stood next to her, the two of them making a perfect couple. Yet Carter seemed a bit distracted, looking around. When his eyes met mine, he instinctively moved a step forward. Ignoring Peter beside him, he came right to me, asking, "Why did you block me?" I was a bit confused but replied honestly, "If I remember correctly, we broke up." Carter frowned and tried to grab my hand. "Ella, I never wanted to break up with you, nor did I want to call off the engagement." Hearing this, I found it amusing and dodged his touch. "But everything you've done shows you never really liked me. When the accident happened, I was alone for treatment, and you were by Peter's side. I was struggling, and when I needed help, you told me Peter needed you more. That day I fell down the stairs, and you ignored me, rushing Peter to the hospital while I had to bear the pain and take a cab myself." I looked him straight in the eye, voice calm. "You all love her, only her, so I won't ask for your love anymore." After saying that, Carter's face turned pale as a sheet. He opened and closed his mouth, wanting to say something. But I turned and walked away, not wanting to see more. only to find Peter and my parents standing behind me, seemingly overhearing everything. They looked away when I met their eyes, their expressions awkward. Peter, however, with a pitiful look, started. "Ella, why do you think like that? Mom and Dad just care more about me because back then." Again, with her same old excuses that I'm tired of hearing. I raised my hand to stop her, staring intently. "I didn't admit to something I didn't do back then. You should know better what really happened." With those words, my parents and Carter showed confusion. Peter, seeing their expressions, quickly teared up with glistening eyes. "Ella, how can you say that? For what you did to survive back then, I never blamed you, but don't I have the right to tell the truth?" I chuckled quietly, taking a step forward. "Is it the truth or just your fabrication? You know the difference." I turned to face my parents. A spoiled child gets all the attention, but I never learned that trick. Does that mean it's fair to ignore me? I walked away without another look. Knowing it would turn out like this, why did I even show up? The days following were busy. Whenever I hit a block in my writing, Barry would somehow sense it and offer advice. After finishing my new book, I decided to invite Barry out for lunch as a thank you. He agreed without hesitation. We sat across from each other at a restaurant, chatting and laughing easily thanks to our recent talks. Suddenly, my editor called, asking, "Ella, are you still not going to the book signing event?" I lowered my eyes, shaking my head. "No, I can't. I'm not comfortable with it. I've never held a signing event because I feel my image isn't suited for public appearances." I glanced down at my leg, feeling inadequate and ugly. I feared it might scare people. Barry suddenly gestured to a waiter and spoke quietly. Moments later, the waiter brought a finely wrapped rectangular box. Barry handed it to me, and I looked at him puzzled. He nodded and softly said, "Open it up." I unwrapped it, feeling a jolt as I saw what was inside. It was a stunning prosthetic, wrapped in thorns and adorned with roses, like life blossoming from pain. Tears welled up, and I was speechless. "You." Barry smiled. "I've had this gift ready for a while, but the timing never felt right before." He paused. "I believe people aren't as prejudiced as we fear. Perhaps they'll see more of your strength and self-acceptance than anything else. I'm glad I got to witness your journey. I want to be there when people recognize and appreciate you." A month later, I decided to attend the signing event. Just like Barry said, maybe I could try accepting myself more. But before it could happen, Peter called me out. In a cafe, Peter sat across from me. I expected her to be riding high, but she looked upset. "What did you do? Why won't Carter marry me?" I couldn't help but laugh with a hint of sarcasm. "Maybe Carter's in love with me. You know, sister, I should thank you. If you hadn't gone abroad, how could I have been with him all these years?" Hearing this, she was seething, her stare cutting like a knife. "So what? You're a cripple. Do you think he really loves you?" I raised an eyebrow at her anger. "Then why won't he marry you?" Her chest heaved, shocked that her timid little sister could talk back. Trying to regain control, she forced a smile. "You think you haven't failed? After that accident, who believed you? Everyone thought you were the one who hurt me." Feigning surprise, I asked, "Is that you?" Seeing my reaction, Peter smiled with satisfaction. "Yeah, you're nowhere near as good as me, so why do you get to be with him? We could just die together, but fate gave me another chance to have him back." She was so pleased with herself that I couldn't help laughing out loud. She frowned. "What are you laughing at?" I looked at her and placed my phone on the table. Carter's name was on it. Carter then came out from around the corner, holding his own phone. Carter looked at Peter with disappointment in his eyes. "Why would you do this?" Peter panicked immediately and rushed over to grab his hand. "I didn't." "Carter, let me explain." Carter pulled away. "I've heard it all." Peter's eyes turned red, tears brimming. I love you, I love you. All those years abroad, every moment I regretted it. Yet when I came back, I heard you were going to marry her. How could I just accept that? Watching this unfold, I felt nothing but irony. Does not being able to accept it let you ruin someone's life? This is the daughter raised by my indulgent parents. Carter suddenly looked at me, filled with regret. Ella, I wrongly accused you. I didn't think she could be so vicious. I looked at him coldly. Didn't think it or just instinctively believed her side? He trembled, repeating apologies. But if sorry could erase the hurt, then what was all that pain for? Peter was also sobbing, pulling at Carter, asking him to look at her again. I didn't want to be the center of attention, so I grabbed my bag and left without looking back. A week later, the book signing event I was anxious about finally arrived. At the venue, I walked in with the prosthetic leg Barry gave me, slowly appearing to the readers. There was an initial gasp. My heart raced as if it would leap out of my chest. I clutched my palm tight, waiting for judgment. The next moment, someone shouted, "You're beautiful." Followed by more praises, deafening. I was stunned, looking at all those eyes appreciating, without any prejudice. At that moment, the weight in my heart finally eased. Nose tingling, almost tearing up. The rest of the event was warm. I signed each new book with my pen name, Swim Fish. I interacted with every reader, listened to their stories or confessions. When it was a young girl's turn, she suddenly asked, "Can I hug you?" I nodded, stood up, and hugged her. She seemed like a student, tiptoed, and whispered in my ear, "You're so strong and beautiful, that's why you can write such moving words. Your book helped me through a tough time, thank you so much." Feeling her sincere affection, I couldn't help but smile. Thank you for your support. No matter what you face, have the courage to leave the shore. After the girl left, the signing continued. Suddenly, a pair of long hands handed a book to me. Instinctively, I looked up. It was Barry. He smiled softly and said, "Ella, I've liked you for a long time. Can you sign this for me?" Coming to, with slightly reddened eyes, I smiled. Of course. After the signing ended, I sat in the lounge. Thinking of the excitement earlier when I saw Barry, it felt like joy. I hadn't given him an answer that day and fled instead. I always wondered, what could someone like me offer him? A broken body, an unlikable personality. There seems no reason for him to like me. But today's event showed me I'm cherished by many. There was a knock at the door, and I looked up. Barry, holding a bouquet of roses, stood at the door and walked slowly towards me. He handed me the roses, his voice soft in my ear. "Ella, since you accepted my gift, can I boldly ask for you to give me a chance to be your boyfriend?" Looking into his eyes, I remembered that night in the hallway. Those same eyes, reciting my favorite line. It made me realize in the endless darkness, my future could still be bright. I couldn't help crying, nodding while choking. Okay. In the next second, I was enveloped in a warm hug. Warm breath tickled my ear as he softly said, "Ella, you did great. So many are proud of you." Not long after, I heard the news of Peter's imprisonment. It was Carter. I wasn't surprised. Even if he hadn't, I would have. She deliberately orchestrated that crash by bribing the truck driver. Years ago, when she went abroad, she discovered Carter and I were together. So, she often contacted Carter, asking him to wait for her return. Later, when Peter came back, she sought Carter first. She begged Carter not to marry me, but he refused. Years of unrequited love led her to drug Carter. That night, she succeeded. But Carter berated her, calling her shameless, accelerating the engagement. That's why Peter did something so extreme on the day I went to choose the wedding dress. She was once the untouchable one in his heart. Carter felt guilty for a time, caring more for Peter. In the end, even he couldn't distinguish if it was care or love reigniting. When he said this, Carter was sitting across from me, looking weary and much slimmer than last time. When he looked at me, guilt filled his eyes. Ella, I'm sorry. From the start till now, I've wronged you. I looked at him calmly, saying nothing. He suddenly stood, took out a glittering ring from his pocket. Then, kneeling on one knee, eyes burning into mine. Ella, we should have gotten married 2 years ago. It's not too late now, right? Will you still marry me? I instinctively stepped back, blurting out. Are you crazy? He gave a bitter smile and glanced down at my prosthetic leg, his eyes glistening with tears. In my surprised gaze, he leaned in, seemingly wanting to kiss the rose on my prosthetic. But just then, someone quickly stepped forward. With a swift kick, he was knocked to the ground, with the ring rolling away. I turned my head and saw Barry, his gaze dark and brooding, as he pulled me into his arms. Looking coldly at Carter on the ground, he said, "Sir, maybe you need to get checked by our hospital psych department." Carter awkwardly scrambled up, his face pale and defeated, and asked in a trembling voice, "Ella, who is he?" I looked at Barry with anticipation in his eyes and smiled. "My boyfriend." Only then did Barry's expression soften. He ruffled my hair, smiling as if no one was watching. "Yep, boyfriend." Carter stared at us as if he'd lost his mind, dazed. Barry clearly wasn't interested in his stare and wrapped his arm around me, leading me away. He held my hand tightly the whole way as if afraid I'd run off. Once back in the car, Barry had me sit on the back seat with him. He seemed a bit jealous, burying his head in the nook of my neck, his voice muffled. "I shouldn't have let you meet him." I laughed, running my fingers through his hair, teasing him. "Barry's jealous, huh?" He lifted his head, his dark eyes fixed on mine. "Yep, I'm jealous. How dare he propose to you?" I chuckled and rushed to reassure him. "I had no idea he'd do that. Don't be upset." He tightened his hold, drawing closer, his warm breath swirling. "You owe me." I blinked, thought for a couple of seconds, then planted a kiss on his lips. Before I could pull away, though, he cupped the back of my neck, deepening the kiss. Just as I was getting dizzy and thinking of pushing him away, my phone rang. Breathless, I reached for my phone. One look at the caller ID and I snapped back to awareness. Under Barry's concerned gaze, I answered the call. My mom's voice came through, cautious. "Ella, can you come home for a bit?" I didn't quite get it, unsure why she'd suddenly want me back home. After all, since Peter got sent to prison, I hadn't been in touch with them. I hung up and hesitated, looking at Barry. He squeezed my hand and gently touched my cheek in reassurance. "Want to go?" "If you want, I'll go with you." Back at the house, I asked Barry to wait outside. I then went in alone, spotting both Mom and Dad sitting on the couch. When they saw me come in, they eagerly approached. "Ella, you're back." Uncomfortable with their attitude, I took a step back. "Do you need something?" They exchanged a glance, with a slightly conciliatory look, and my mom spoke. "I remember you used to love my sweet and sour ribs. I made them tonight. Why don't you stay for dinner?" Hearing this, I understood. With their eldest daughter in trouble, they suddenly remembered me. Maybe out of guilt, or because they needed another daughter to present to the world. I raised my head to look at Mom, speaking deliberately. "I don't like sweet and sour ribs. That's what Peter likes." At my words, Mom froze, looking at Dad with a helpless expression. Dad sighed. "Ella, we've neglected you for years." I had imagined such a scene before. Every time they overlooked me, young me would fantasize. What if one day, Mom held me and apologized, saying she actually loved me too? Peter lightly patted her chest with a hint of apology. That far dream, now happening, shattered all illusions. I looked at them calmly. "You know, I've always wondered, although my sister and I look so alike, just because she's better at acting cute and you like her more, she got to cuddle with Mom at night and wear prettier dresses. When she cleared the table, she was your adorable girl, while when I did it, you said I was only good at simple tasks. My eyes turned slightly red, taking a deep breath. Dad, Mom, children don't just stop loving their parents overnight. Over the years, I've stopped expecting anything from you. So please, don't start paying attention to me now. This is something you haven't done before, and you don't need to start now. Their faces turned pale, morphing into guilt. But this guilt came too late. I walked out the door, finding Barry waiting not far away. Seeing me, he quickly walked over to hug me tightly. I hugged him back, drawing warmth from his embrace. He didn't ask about anything and just gently kissed my cheek, softly saying, "Tired? Want to go home?" I nodded, responding quietly. The next moment, he scooped me up, humming like he was soothing a child. "All right, our bravest, strongest Ella is heading home." His words made me chuckle, and I lightly patted his shoulder. Since when did Barry switch careers to teach kindergarten? He chuckled lowly. Well, there's an Ella at home that needs comforting, you know. My ears turned red, and I buried my head against him, staying silent. In the distance, the sunset cast its glow, falling along the path home. The thorned rose on my prosthetic shimmered with a gentle light, and it seemed like the road ahead became smooth and clear.